The first thing Isaac Ellery noticed when he stepped off the transport pod was the smell. Not bad, just strange, like rusted copper mixed with warm stone after rain. The sky above the alien outpost shimmered with vertical streaks of pale green light, and the air was dry enough to chap lips in minutes. "Please proceed to Assessment Hall 3, the translator drone said in its clipped, genderless voice. Isaac adjusted the straps of his supply bag, glanced up at the tower-like structures dotting the distant ridgeline, and muttered, "Yeah, sure." Because Hall 1 and 2 are probably already blown up. He followed the marked path through an angular corridor carved into the side of a butte. Everything was built from the same gray alloy, dull, indestructible, absolutely joyless. As he passed under a flickering green panel, the door ear-eyed open and revealed a massive amphitheater-style classroom. He was the last to arrive. The other students, if that was the right word, were already seated in semicircular rows. They weren't human, not even close. One looked like a stack of glistening cubes with blinking lights. Another resembled a stretched balloon with eyes scattered across its surface like barnacles. And then there was the teacher. Tall, layered in translucent plates of something between glass and cartilage, the instructor radiated a quiet authority. Its face, if it had one, was a ring of pulsing lights arranged in a spiral. "Welcome to Structural Adaptation Practicum," it said, voice translated through the ceiling speakers. "I am called Keller. You will construct vertical support systems using only resources available in the surrounding region. Natural and artificial debris is permitted. The highest stable tower determines success." Isaac raised his hand. "What's the grading scale?" Keller tilted slightly. "Success is survival. There is no curve." That shut him up. The amphitheater dimmed, and a holographic map of the terrain bloomed in the center. Debris fields were marked in red, salvageable materials in blue. Most zones were harsh, steep cliffs, magnetic storms, brittle ground, but one area, near the edge of a canyon, had a mix of old alloy wreckage and abandoned building frames. "Begin immediately," Keller said. "Communication is permitted, sabotage is not. Physical conflict will result in disintegration." Isaac blinked. "Did you just say disintegration?" "Confirmed." He slung his bag over his shoulder and headed for the exit ramp. Outside, the wind had picked up and carried flecks of fine grit that stung his eyes. He shielded his face with a piece of broken insulation foam he found leaning against the wall. Half a mile from the outpost, he reached the edge of the zone. 3 other students were already there. One was using its own body to extrude scaffolding. Another levitated chunks of metal into geometric shapes. The third was wrapping vines around stolen turbine blades. Isaac looked around, nothing but wreckage. A broken transport lay half buried in sediment, its hull split open like a can of tuna. He climbed inside, kicking aside burned-out circuitry and brittle foam padding until he found a spine of alloy beams intact enough to drag out. He worked through the first day without speaking. Sweat soaked his shirt, and by evening his arms were raw from hauling sharp-edged panels. He hadn't built anything yet, but he had a pile. That night he slept in a hollowed-out cargo bin, curled like a raccoon. By morning the others had actual structures. One tower was already 12 meters tall, a lattice of mineral threads. Another was a floating spiral held aloft by anti-grav pulses. Isaac's pile looked like a junkyard after a hurricane. Keller arrived mid-morning, hovering several feet off the ground. "Progress evaluation in 72 hours. Stability and height will be measured." "Warning, environmental shifts expected." Isaac wiped dirt from his face. "Defined shifts. Winds at 140 kilometers per hour. Groundquakes. Possible debris storms. Prepare accordingly." "Right, nothing too crazy." He spent the next 12 hours building a base. No fancy materials, just leverage. He used the largest pieces of debris as anchors, wedging them into the canyon floor and bolting them together with scavenged fasteners. When bolts weren't available, he used strips of melted polymer to fuse metal joints. He tested every connection by climbing it himself. Once, a beam gave out and cracked him across the shoulder. He lay on the ground for 5 minutes, breathing shallowly until the pain ebbed. Later that night, he walked half a mile to find more materials. He found a shattered comms tower and spent 3 hours dismantling it. One of the alien students passed by, floating silently. "I see your structure is still horizontal," the alien said. "Yeah," Isaac said, panting. "I'm going for the weight until everyone else fails and then pull a miracle strategy." The alien stared at him. "That is poor strategy." "Yeah, well, I'm human. We do poor strategies better than anyone." By the end of the second day, Isaac had a base 8 meters wide and 2 meters high. It looked ridiculous, but it didn't move in the wind and it held his weight. That night, the wind screamed through the canyons. The alien towers trembled but held. Isaac's base didn't budge. He lay flat on top of it, wrapped in a thermal blanket, listening to the sand scrape across the alloy like fingernails. On the third day, he started stacking. He used a counterbalance system wider at the bottom, narrower at the top. Every piece he added had to be secured 3 ways: bolted, bound, and weighted. He climbed up and down the structure a dozen times, each trip more exhausting than the last. Midday, he slipped. His foot caught a loose bracket. He fell 6 meters and landed hard on his side. Pain lit up his ribs and he couldn't breathe. He lay there, gasping, until the world narrowed to a tunnel. Eventually, the pain dulled just enough for him to crawl back to the base. He ran a scan using the medkit. Possible hairline rib fractures. "Recommend rest," he laughed, then coughed, which hurt so much he saw stars. "No rest," he muttered. "Gotta win the weird alien homework." He splinted himself with strips of foam and duct tape. Every movement was agony, but he kept climbing. That night, one of the alien towers collapsed. The ground quaked briefly, and the spiral tower twisted sideways before folding in on itself like a dying insect. The builder howled and flung itself into the storm. Isaac's structure swayed, but didn't fall. Keller returned at dawn. Final measurement in 6 hours. Prepare. Isaac's tower was nearly 20 meters tall, ugly, crooked, but still standing. He added the last beams, using a pulley system made from shredded cables and a broken wheel. His fingers bled. His ribs throbbed with every breath. At the final hour, he climbed to the top and bolted an antenna segment to the peak. It creaked but held. Keller floated up beside him. "Complete," Isaac nodded barely. "Remain in position." The instructor scanned the towers. One alien design had reached 28 meters but was swaying dangerously. Another was sleeker, but a quarter of its height was artificial levitation, not true structure. Isaac's was 21 meters, all debris, all physical. Keller hovered silently for several minutes. "You have achieved the highest stable vertical structure using only regional debris and no artificial assistance. You are the victor of this practicum." Isaac leaned against the antenna and muttered, "Cool. Your methods were unorthodox and physically inefficient. However, your adaptation to material limitations and environmental extremes demonstrates high ingenuity." "Thanks," Isaac said. "Do I get a prize?" "Survival is its own reward." Isaac sighed. "Figured." He climbed down slowly, every breath a stab in his side. When he reached the base, he collapsed onto the dirt and stared up at the sky. The green light shimmered above and sand spiraled in the wind. Keller descended beside him. "You are injured. Medical intervention is advised." "Yeah," Isaac said. "I'll take that now." 2 drones lifted him onto a stretcher and carried him back toward the outpost. As they moved through the canyon, one of the drones glanced at his tower. "How did you calculate the load distribution with no advanced tools?" Isaac grimaced. "I didn't. I just kept what didn't fall. That's the trick. Don't let anything fall." Keller watched him go, silent. Behind them, the tower stood crooked and defiant against the wind. The stretcher swayed slightly as the drones maneuvered it down the narrow canyon corridor toward the outpost's medical station. Isaac blinked against the overhead light, trying not to breathe too deeply. Every inhale felt like a screwdriver twisting into his ribs. A serpentine creature with rows of delicate arms met them just outside the hatch. It wore a blue sash that shimmered like oil on water and hovered just off the ground by way of a humming disc embedded beneath its torso. "You are the human with thoracic trauma," it said, turning its long face toward him. "I am Vesh of Medic Order 32. Do not speak unless necessary." Isaac gave a lazy thumbs up. The medical bay was cooler than outside. Not cold exactly, but still enough to make the sweat on his skin feel like ice patches. The walls were curved and embedded with bands of glowing text in a language that reminded him of tangled headphone wires. Vesh guided the stretcher into a recessed pit lined with foam that adjusted instantly around Isaac's body. A metallic ring descended from the ceiling and halted just above his chest. "I will now scan for internal damage. Remain still." Isaac stared at the ceiling. "I've got 6 cracked ribs, maybe 7. Vesh paused. "You have previously acquired a medical scan, just a portable kit." It said possible fractures. I figured it was being polite. The ring clicked softly as it began its sweep. A nearby monitor displayed a rotating model of Isaac's torso, organs pulsing faintly in color-coded layers. Vesh made a low, chittering sound, almost like a sigh. "You have 7 fractures. 1 with minor displacement. No organ perforation. You may consider yourself statistically fortunate." "Statistically, sure." "Practically, I feel like I lost a bar fight with a vending machine." Vesh didn't respond. Instead, it extended a thin, needle-tipped arm from its side and pressed it into a dispenser. A clear pouch inflated with a thick, amber fluid. "This will reduce swelling and accelerate bone regeneration." "It will sting." "How bad are we talking?" "Comparable to venom from a moderately aggressive Larthic beetle." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "That's not a reference I have, but it sounds like something I'd rather avoid." The needle slipped under his skin without warning. The fluid burned, not just at the site but radiating outward like his veins had been replaced with molten wire. He clenched his jaw until the wave passed, then exhaled in short bursts. "Effective," he muttered, wiping at his forehead. "You will remain horizontal for 3 hours. Afterward, light movement is permitted. Can I sit up and gloat? Just a little." Vesh's many fingers clicked against the console. "I do not understand the cultural motivation for gloating. Is it nutritive?" "Nah, it's just emotional carbs." A pause. "That is neither logical nor helpful." "Yeah," Isaac said, eyes closing. "That's kind of the human brand." 3 hours later, he was sitting on a padded bench, ribs wrapped in a lattice of semi-rigid gel strips that flexed slightly with his breathing. His shirt lay beside him in a crumpled heap, the sweat-stained collar now stiff with dust. He was halfway through a nutrient bar that tasted like sour almonds when the door slid open and Keller entered. The instructor moved with its usual unhurried grace, but the atmosphere shifted. Vesh straightened slightly, tentacles folding inward. "You have recovered sufficiently for debriefing," Keller said. "I can stand, but I wouldn't challenge anyone to a foot race. You are not required to sprint." "Fantastic. Then we're in my wheelhouse." Keller extended a thin projection from its torso, which unfolded into a translucent display. It showed the remains of the tower field, many of the structures now reduced to scattered fragments. Only Isaac's tower stood intact, though one of its top beams had shifted slightly. "You constructed a stable vertical structure from disordered waste material under unpredictable environmental conditions, with no computational assistance. Your output exceeded expectations." Isaac leaned back slightly. "Glad to know my panic engineering is now curriculum material. There is disagreement regarding your continued participation. Define disagreement." "Some members of the evaluation assembly believe your success was anomalous. That it indicates a failure in assessment design rather than an achievement of merit." Isaac chewed the last of the nutrient bar slowly. "So I won, and people are mad about it. They are uncertain how to categorize your methodology. You did not optimize, you did not calculate. You improvised until stability emerged. That's kind of how we do most things. We're not great at plans, but we're fantastic at not dying." Keller watched him, unreadable. The assembly requests a second demonstration, a different scenario, more variables, less salvage. Isaac sighed. Let me guess, no rest until I confuse everyone again. There will be rest, but limited. He stood carefully, ribs reminding him of every bad decision that led here. All right, what's the new test? Keller didn't answer immediately. Instead, it turned toward Vesh. You will monitor the human's recovery. Full participation is conditional on maintained function. Vesh clicked once. Understood. Keller turned back to Isaac. Tomorrow you will receive the next directive. Until then, do not engage in further construction or exertion. Trust me. I have zero plans to lift anything heavier than a spoon. Keller departed without further comment. Vesh approached with a shallow bowl of colorless broth. Consume this. It will maintain electrolyte balance. Isaac sniffed it. Does it taste like anything? No. Perfect. He drank it in 3 gulps, wincing as the last one hit his throat. It wasn't bad, just aggressively bland. Vesh adjusted the medbed and gestured toward it. You are to remain here tonight. Movement outside the facility will be flagged. Isaac lay back, arms behind his head. You ever treat anyone who built a tower out of junk and spite before? No, most patients I encounter are harmed by collapse, not success. He grinned without opening his eyes. We're trendsetters. The lights dimmed gradually, leaving only a soft green glow above the door. Isaac drifted off with the faint whir of machines in his ears. By early morning, he was up again, limping slightly but mobile. Vesh ran another scan, declared his condition stable, and released him with a canister of rehydration gel and a warning not to test the limits of his recovery. Outside, the air had cooled. The canyon winds had shifted direction, carrying flecks of mica that glittered faintly in the dawn light. Keller met him near the perimeter gate, this time flanked by a small floating orb with a single blinking eye. This is the observer. It will record your process for evaluation. Isaac gave the orb a mock salute. Try to get my good side. There is no longer a competitive element, Keller said. This is not a test of superiority, but of adaptability under constraint. Fine. What's the new nightmare? Keller gestured toward a narrow ravine beyond the ridge. You will receive 5 components, no others. You must construct a functional shelter capable of withstanding thermal flux and structural impact. How big is the shelter supposed to be? Human-sized. Comfort is irrelevant. Function is primary. Isaac looked toward the ravine. He could already see the shimmer of heat rising from the rocks. And the impact part? There will be falling debris at irregular intervals. You may not reposition the shelter after construction begins. So it's a build it right the first time situation. Correct. Isaac rubbed at his chin. All right. What are the 5 components? Keller produced a holographic list. 1 segmented alloy panel, warped on one side, 2 flexible carbon mesh sheets, a broken hydraulic strut, a length of thermoplastic tubing, 1 container of adhesive resin. Limited quantity. Isaac stared at the list for a moment. That's not a shelter. That's a list of things you find in a garage sale bin marked free, don't ask. You may begin within 2 hours. Observer will signal start. Keller turned and moved away, leaving Isaac in the shadow of the ridge, eyeing the ravine like it had personally insulted him. The orb hovered closer, blinking steadily. He muttered, all right, let's see if I can survive building a tent out of future trash. He knelt beside the materials already laid out on the ground, fingers tracing the warped edge of the alloy panel. First rule, don't die. Second rule, don't bleed on anything expensive. The sun climbed higher and the rocks began to glow. 2 hours. Then things would fall from the sky, and he'd have to be standing under something that wouldn't fold like paper. He sat cross-legged in the dirt, staring at the parts, waiting for the observer to blink green. Let's do it again, he whispered. But stupider. The observer blinked green just as the sun crested over the ridge, casting long shadows down the ravine. Isaac cracked his knuckles and squatted beside the scattered components, eyeing them like a puzzle with missing pieces and no box art. The warped alloy panel was heavier than it looked, and the bent strut clanged dully when he dragged it across the rock. "Observation has begun," the orb announced, hovering just behind his shoulder. Isaac didn't look up. "You're not going to offer design tips, are you?" "No, didn't think so." He laid the alloy panel flat and stepped back, circling once. The left edge curled upward like a Pringle, which made it useless for a flat roof, but potentially helpful for redirecting force. He tapped it with his boot and it rang faintly. The two carbon mesh sheets were intact, surprisingly. Lightweight, flexible, and textured like a stretched batwing. He held one up to the light and watched it shimmer faintly in the heat haze. Good for tension, bad for impact. The hydraulic strut was cracked near the base, leaking a thick, amber fluid that smelled faintly like burnt sugar. He prodded the crack with a gloved fingertip, then wiped it on his pant leg. So, no pressure support, just a splint on a bad day. The thermoplastic tubing was coiled tight, still soft from ambient heat. He unspooled some and found that it held shape briefly before sagging under its own weight. Not ideal, the adhesive resin was in a sealed pouch half full with a nozzle that had already crusted at the tip. He slid it open with a shard of alloy and gave it a tentative squeeze. It oozed out slow like cold honey. No second chances once it's set. "All right," he muttered. "Let's build a miracle before the sky throws rocks at me." He started by driving the base of the strut into a natural crack in the canyon floor, wedging it deep with repeated stomps. Then he bent the warped alloy panel over it, using the strut as a spine. The curve faced outward, like a turtle shell, and he used the tubing to lash its edges to nearby rocks. The tubing warped under pressure, so he doubled it back in loops, then cinched it with knots that held by sheer tension. The mesh sheets came next. He stretched one across the open side of the structure, anchoring it with sharp fragments wedged into crevices. The second sheet he folded over the top, layering it under the alloy panel to absorb shock. It fluttered in the wind like sailcloth before he pinned it down. The resin was last. He sealed every joint he could reach, especially where the panel met the strut. It hardened fast, going tacky before he was finished spreading it. He pressed down with both hands, feeling it stiffen beneath his palms. It wasn't pretty. It looked like someone had tried to build a lean-to using car parts and leftover camping gear. But it was enclosed, it had support, and it didn't collapse when he leaned against it. "Structure completed," he said, stepping back. "Time? 17 minutes, the observer replied. Not bad for a guy with duct tape holding his ribs together. He crawled inside, careful not to snag the mesh. The interior was cramped, barely enough space to sit cross-legged. The heat was tolerable, though the air smelled faintly of adhesive and old metal. He adjusted the mesh slightly to let in airflow, then leaned back against the strut. "Monitoring for impact sequence," the orb said. Nothing happened for several minutes. The wind shifted, carrying the high whine of distant turbines from the ridge. Then a dull thud echoed from somewhere up canyon. Isaac tensed. That better not be the opening act. A screech followed, metallic and abrupt. He ducked instinctively, though nothing hit. Dust drifted through the mesh in lazy spirals. Then, without warning, a chunk of alloy the size of a refrigerator slammed down 10 meters away, sending up a geyser of grit. The ground trembled. Isaac flinched, one hand braced on the strut. A second impact followed, closer this time. Smaller but angled. It struck the ravine wall, ricocheted, and clipped the outer edge of the mesh. The sheet held, but Isaac heard it tear near the anchor point. "Minor damage to outer layer," the observer noted. "No kidding." He crawled to the tier and wedged a flat rock against it from the inside. It wasn't a real repair, but it redirected the tension. He pressed his back to the strut again and waited. More impacts followed over the next half hour, some direct, some glancing. One piece bounced off the curved alloy panel with a loud, metallic ping, but the angle held. The structure absorbed the force, transferring it down through the strut and into the canyon floor. Isaac stayed hunched, breathing shallowly, counting the seconds between strikes. At one point, a vibration traveled up the strut and into his ribs, and he grit his teeth until it passed. The pain was sharp but tolerable. He focused on the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady and slow. Eventually, the impact stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the distant hiss of wind. "Impact sequence concluded," the observer said. "Please exit the structure for evaluation." Isaac crawled out, blinking against the sunlight. His back was damp with sweat and dust clung to his skin in uneven patches. Keller arrived 6 minutes later, silent as before. It circled the shelter once, scanning from multiple angles. One of its appendages extended and tapped the alloy panel. It didn't move. "You remained inside throughout the event, didn't even flinch. Much. Structural integrity maintained. Damage minimal, no component failure." Isaac stretched slowly, arms above his head. "So did I pass the don't get crushed by space junk lesson? There is no pass or fail, only demonstration of response." "Then yeah, that was my response." Keller turned toward the observer. "End session. Transmit full record." The orb beeped once and floated away toward the outpost. Isaac rubbed at the back of his neck, fingers catching on dried resin. "So, what now? Another round of build a thing out of garbage?" "No, the assembly has concluded its observation." "Your results have been deemed sufficient." "Which means?" "You have achieved functional adaptation under constrained material and environmental conditions without algorithmic assistance or procedural templates. That satisfies the parameters." Isaac exhaled. "That's a long way of saying I'm done." "Correct." He looked back at the shelter. It was ugly, dented, and already sun-bleached, but it had held. "Can I keep it?" Keller paused. "For what purpose?" "Might make a decent storage unit. Or a weird conversation starter." "You may retain it." Isaac nodded. "Cool." Vesh arrived shortly after, gliding silently as always. It carried a small container and extended it toward him. "For the pain, you will experience delayed inflammation." Isaac accepted the capsule without comment. He swallowed it dry and winced as it caught in his throat. Appreciated. "You require no further treatment. However, avoid abrupt compression or rotational strain for the next 2 cycles." "I'll try not to sneeze too hard." Keller remained still for a moment longer. "Then, your presence has disrupted assumptions. That is valuable even if inconvenient." "I tend to do that." "You may return to your original assignment rotation or request reassignment." Isaac looked at the ravine, at the dented panel, at his hands still stained with resin and dust. "I think I'll go back. Let someone else figure out how to survive a rockfall with a trash bag and a prayer." Vesh gestured for him to follow. "Transport awaits. You are cleared for departure." He hesitated just a moment, then turned and walked beside the medic, feet crunching softly in the gravel. The wind had shifted again, cooler now, and the sky above the ridge was streaked with thin clouds. As they reached the outpost gate, the observer hovered once more into view, blinking slowly. Isaac waved. "Hope you got my good side." "There is no discernible difference, brutal." He stepped through the hatch and the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. No alarms, no applause, just quiet, and that was enough.